The night my world collapsed didn't begin with shouting, broken glass, or some dramatic confession. It started with one missed phone call, one unexpected text, and one decision that made me question whether the two people I trusted most had been lying to me for months.
My name is Jake, and until that Friday, I believed I had everything figured out. Emily wasn't just my girlfriend of 4 years, she was the woman I pictured beside me forever. My best friend Ryan had been like a brother since middle school, so betrayal never even crossed my mind. Emily and I met during our sophomore year of college after accidentally reaching for the same book in the campus library. She laughed first, I apologized twice, and somehow we spent the next 3 hours talking instead of studying. From that day on, life felt surprisingly simple.
Ryan loved teasing us about how cheesy we were. He'd joke that we'd end up naming our future kids after our favorite movies. We spent holidays together, watched football every Sunday, and celebrated birthdays like one big family. Looking back, that's probably why I ignored everything that should have scared me.
The first red flag didn't seem important. Emily suddenly became protective of her phone. She used to leave it on the kitchen counter without thinking, but now she'd flip it face down every time a notification appeared. I noticed, then convinced myself I was imagining things.
A week later, Ryan canceled our monthly poker night because he claimed he was working late. Emily also texted me saying she'd be staying with her sister after helping her organize some boxes. Neither excuse felt strange until I remembered Emily's sister was visiting another state that week.
I almost called Emily to ask about it, but I stopped myself. Relationships survive because of trust, not constant suspicion. At least, that's what I kept repeating inside my head. I wanted to be the secure boyfriend, not the jealous guy inventing problems that didn't exist. Then little details started piling up like puzzle pieces I couldn't ignore. Ryan suddenly knew things Emily hadn't told me. Emily laughed at inside jokes I never heard. Whenever the three of us were together, conversations seemed to stop for half a second whenever I entered the room. One Saturday afternoon, we planned a barbecue at my place. Ryan volunteered to bring drinks while Emily offered to pick up dessert. They arrived together, saying they'd accidentally bumped into each other at the grocery store. It sounded believable, until I realized they came from opposite directions. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed every awkward glance, every unfinished sentence, every strange coincidence. None of it proved anything, yet together they formed a feeling I couldn't shake. I hated myself for doubting the two people who had always stood beside me. The following Tuesday, I left work early because our office lost power during a storm. I figured I'd surprise Emily with lunch since she was working remotely from our apartment. Halfway home, she texted saying she had an important video meeting and couldn't talk for hours. Something about that message felt rehearsed. Instead of going upstairs immediately, I parked across the street and waited. 10 minutes later, Ryan's truck pulled into our apartment complex. He looked around before walking toward my building. My stomach dropped harder than it ever had in my life. I wanted an explanation that made sense. Maybe he was helping Emily fix something. Maybe he'd forgotten to tell me. I gave them every possible excuse while walking toward the apartment. Deep down, though, my hands were already shaking because my instincts were screaming louder than logic. When I unlocked the front door, the apartment was silent except for nervous whispers coming from our bedroom. I called Emily's name. The whispers stopped instantly. Then I heard footsteps, a drawer slam shut, and someone mutter a curse I recognized as Ryan's voice. I opened the bedroom door and froze. Emily stood there trying to button her shirt, while Ryan stared at the floor without saying a word. No explanation arrived. No clever lie appeared. The truth filled the room before either of them opened their mouths. Emily started crying immediately. Ryan kept saying, "Jake, listen," but I couldn't hear anything after that. My ears rang so loudly it felt like the walls were collapsing. 4 years with the woman I loved and 20 years with my closest friend disappeared in one heartbeat.
I walked out before either of them finished speaking. My phone exploded with calls and messages, but I couldn't answer. I drove for hours without knowing where I was going. Every mile only brought another memory. Vacations, birthdays, late-night conversations, all poisoned by one impossible question: how long? The next morning, Emily showed up at my parents' house because she knew I'd probably be there. She begged me to hear her side. Through tears, she admitted the affair had started 3 months earlier after Ryan helped her during one of our rough patches. She insisted it wasn't planned. One emotional conversation became another, then one mistake turned into several. She claimed she tried ending it multiple times, but couldn't figure out how to confess without destroying everyone. Ironically, hiding it destroyed us even more completely. Ryan finally called from a number I didn't recognize because I'd blocked his regular phone. His voice cracked as he admitted everything was his fault too. He said he'd hated himself every single day, but convinced himself telling me would only cause more pain. What hurt most wasn't hearing that they'd fallen for each other. It was learning they'd smiled at me across dinner tables, laughed beside me during football games, and accepted birthday gifts while carrying a secret together. Every shared memory suddenly felt fake. Friends quickly picked sides once the truth spread. Some defended Emily, saying relationships become complicated. Others completely cut Ryan out of their lives. I didn't ask anyone to choose. I simply realized betrayal doesn't only break trust, it forces everyone connected to the story into impossible positions. For weeks, I questioned every decision I'd ever made. Was I too busy with work? Did I miss obvious signs? Could I have prevented any of it? Those thoughts became a prison until my father quietly reminded me someone else's choices aren't proof of my worth. Emily kept writing long emails explaining how sorry she was. She never blamed me. She accepted responsibility and admitted she expected me to walk away forever. Reading those messages hurt because they sounded sincere, yet sincerity couldn't erase months of deception. About 2 months later, Ryan asked if we could meet one final time. Against everyone's advice, I agreed. We sat across from each other in a nearly empty diner where we'd spent countless weekends growing up. Neither of us touched the food we ordered. Ryan admitted he'd always admired Emily, but buried those feelings out of loyalty. When our relationship became strained, he crossed a line he'd promised himself he'd never cross. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He only wanted me to know he regretted becoming the villain in my story. I looked at him for a long moment before realizing revenge wouldn't heal anything. Anger had already stolen enough months from my life. I told him I couldn't be his friend anymore, but I refused to spend the rest of my future chained to hatred. Leaving that diner felt strangely peaceful. Not because everything was fixed, but because I finally accepted something painful. Closure doesn't always arrive through apologies or explanations. Sometimes it begins the moment you stop waiting for the past to become different. Nearly a year later, I moved into a smaller apartment across town and started rebuilding my life piece by piece. I picked up old hobbies, reconnected with forgotten friends, and slowly remembered who I was before my entire identity revolved around one relationship. One afternoon, I unexpectedly saw Emily at a bookstore. We exchanged a quiet smile instead of awkward silence. Neither of us pretended nothing happened. We simply acknowledged that two people can deeply affect each other's lives without being meant to stay in each other's future. People often ask whether I ever forgave them. The honest answer is complicated. I forgave them because carrying bitterness became heavier than carrying heartbreak.
Forgiveness didn't rebuild trust, restart friendships, or erase scars. It simply gave me permission to keep living.
If there's one lesson I learned, it's that betrayal rarely arrives wearing a warning sign. Sometimes it hides behind familiar smiles and ordinary days until the truth becomes impossible to ignore. If this story moved you, subscribe, leave a comment with your thoughts, and share it with someone who believes healing is always possible.